Hey, how are you? I miss you. Okay, I'm going to just do a short video just to kind of give you I know you've probably seen some of this, but I'm just going to give you the quick rundown of how I do it. First of all, I would get some fine silver bezel wire because it's so much easier to start off with. So that might be step one. Brass is going to be hard to push over because it work hardens so quickly. So it's not going to be real easy to set a stone. So a couple of things I'm going to show you. I'm going to start off and show you what I do. Hang on. All right. So hopefully you can see kind of what I'm doing here. Okay, so I use silver wire a lot of times when I want a thicker, heavier bezel. So this is sterling silver strip. This is 24 gauge. I use this quite a bit when I want a little bit thicker look to a bezel. You can hammer it more and it kind of gives you a little bit more thickness to the bezel. This here is 28 gauge fine silver wire. This is the easiest thing to learn on. Don't go under the 28 gauge. I think they do a 30 and a 32. Just stick with the 28 gauge. Works really well. This in particular here is, I think it's, let's see, this is 4.75 millimeters. That's kind of like what I would call the standard width. You can get it thinner or thicker, but this is about the standard width. Here's my little stone. This is a labradorite. I'm going to just make a little bezel for. This one in particular is, let's see, 9.75 by 12 or 11 and a half, 12, somewhere in there. Okay, so first off, you look at the side of the stone. And you make sure right when it starts to actually slope is about how wide you want to make, tall you want to make your bezel. So you don't want to have your bezel wire be this huge wire that comes over. So you would never use for this size of stone something this tall. It's just too much. It would cover up way too much of the stone. So what you have to do is kind of look at the side of the stone, and when it first starts sloping is kind of where you want to decide what your width should be. This is a pair of dividers. These are called the starette dividers. They're like 60 bucks, but I'd use this tool like multiple times a day, every day to do things. And it's probably the one tool that's my favorite tool at any rate. So I'm looking at this and I'm kind of going, well, I need this bezel to be tall enough, but I don't want it to be too tall. If you got a little belly on the stone, in other words, it bows out versus just being crisp flat, you kind of want to compensate a little bit for that. So when I start to look at this, I'm kind of seeing that I only want the bezel to come up maybe about there. Can you see how wide that is? Okay. So when I go and I look at that, and then I go to, with my digital calipers is what I use. You can get a pair like this, a cheapy pair from Harbor and Freight for like 20, 30 bucks. Not real expensive. So this is telling me like 2.5 millimeters. So I have my Starette's dividers. I have them already opened to 2.5. Based on kind of measuring the stone, and then I run it where I run it down the length of the bezel wire piece, and I make a straight line. So you have one guide on the flat surface, you run it against that edge, and then you've created this nice crisp line running down that. So that's what I'm going to cut on, is that line. So a lot of people use Joyce Chen like scissors, like kitchen shear scissors. I use, sorry, I'm adjusting here a little. I use, they call them French shears. You can get them in any of the jewelry catalog. The Joyce Chen works good too. It's just what I prefer because sometimes I'm using a little thicker metal than the Joyce Chen's So then at that point, I just go down and I cut that strip. Just following the line and just take my time and you're going to sand the bezel, so it's okay if it's got a little bit of, jaggedness to it. You don't want a lot, but anyway, so you end up with the strip. It kind of has a curl to it. To compensate for that curl, I just get my bezel pusher, my burnisher, pardon me, and I just kind of straighten it out. Just do it real careful. If you run it too hard, I'm kind of curling it to get it uncurled from cutting with the scissors, and then I can just run the burnisher along it like that, just so I'm trying to keep it straight. So if you're using the fine silver, there's quite a bit of malleability, so you don't have to worry too much about it. Okay, from that point, what I'm going to do is have this bezel wrap around. So this is kind of tricky to get used to doing, but once you start doing it, you can do it pretty easily. So kind of start off, and I just literally wrap it around. So there's a lot of school of thoughts that you wrap around a piece of paper, then you measure the paper against that, and I don't know, that's a bunch of bullshit. I think you can do it just as easy this way. So I've wrapped the bezel around this, and I've wrapped it where it's pretty tight on it. So as you can see, it's looking like it fits around it pretty well. And so what I'm hoping to do now is go on the side, and I'm going to kind of make a mark where the two bezel pieces, the short end and then the long end, meet, where they're going to meet up. And so from there, this is gym school for the retarded. Anyway, sorry. Okay, so I mark it with a scribe. So whatever you use as a scribe, I'm sure you have something that will work as a scribe, something to make a mark. So I take that mark, and just on the other side of that mark, I just cut it with the scissors. Then I come back to my bezel, and now I'm looking, and I've got this gap here, but if I kind of push this bezel down, I kind of can go around, get this bezel pushed down. I'm just kind of, you can bring in, some of the other tools to kind of just make sure that you're pushing everything down. Then where it's overlapping, I make sure that I kind of get this wire straight on the bottom, and I kind of see this overlap. So I take and I scribe along that overlap. But now I've got this other little teeny line in there, and I'm going to trim up on there because I know I don't need all of that length. So at this point, I'm going to go back and just see how that's working. So you don't want to have a lot of big gaps. Have it be a loose bezel. You can always stretch, especially the fine silver bezel, just a little bit. So you want to just be sure that you get a nice, good fit going around. So I'm going back and I'm trimming one more time just to get a little bit better fit. Okay, so now I kind of feel like, hey, I've got a pretty good fit in there. So from that being said, I'm ready to go ahead and solder this bezel. So how I do it then is I have this slight little, I'm trying to give you a good view of it. I have this slight little gap in there now. I'm going to go ahead and take pliers, and I'm going to meet these two up so that these are becoming real nice flush ends. Depending on what you cut it with, you might have to sand those little ends, and depending on how thick the bezel is. So now that I've got this, it creates a little out of oval shape. No longer the perfect oval shape for that stone, but we can reform that afterwards. So I get these two where they're lined up really well, kind of like what you're doing with a jump ring, just to make sure that all your ends are nice and flush. Sometimes I'll kind of squeeze over it with some flat pliers like that, just to give it a nice join. Not really squeeze it, just kind of gently, kind of just make sure that you're kind of creating a flat little spot there. So from there, what I'm going to do is go ahead and solder those together, because what will happen then is I'll show you kind of how to finish it before you go to solder it down onto your sorry, turn on my tanks. Again, jewelry scooter for the retarded. I'm gonna get these ready, and we're gonna solder it to the plate, but I'm gonna show you how to prep that. I don't know how much of this you've actually learn, but here we go. All right. Here's me soldering. Ah, maybe not. See, jewelry school for the retarded. Hang on. Pause.